Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to be here today. Today, I am here with Dr. Colleen Norris. She is a speaker, a network spinal chiropractor, and healer. She is the founder of Colleen Norris Wellness. She helps people with chronic health issues and anxiety get to the root cause and heal through focusing on the health of their nervous system. The chiropractic technique she uses not only helps her patients achieve greater health and well-being, it helped her heal from debilitating anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. Colleen, I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here and I'm excited. I loved your intro, by the way, too. I was like, "Ooh,
Oh, thank
like,
you. Thank you.
yes,
Thank
I'm in
you.
the right place."
Yes, right? So I have been seeing a chiropractor on and off throughout the year since I was in my 20s. And I remember this chiropractor had a video in the waiting room for people to watch, and it was what we do to our bodies. Right, like from the time we're infants, right? Like you drag your kid by the arm, you're grabbing them, right? Like it's all through love. But I remember being like, oh my God, what do we do to our body? Right. But you even take it to the next step of the whole being, right? Like the nervous system, the energetic system, everything. So when you and I first met, like that was where, because I think I shared with you, I've been seeing chiropractors, but I don't want to be cracked. And I'm using, for those listening, I'm using air quotes, right? I don't want to be cracked anymore. Right. Like
Yeah.
every time they crack my neck, I actually tense up, which it feels like that probably isn't really good. Right. So
Yes.
share with the listeners, your story of how you got to where you are and a little bit more about what exactly it is that you do that makes it a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, you're not alone as far as not wanting to be cracked. So many, it's almost like there's two camps. There's the people that love it, and there's the people that are like, I want nothing to do with that.
I
So
know I feel better after, but I don't know that I've ever not tensed up, which I'm like, that can't be good.
Exactly, exactly. And by the way, I used to practice that kind of chiropractic. So the first decade
Right.
of my career, I was doing the cracking. The quote unquote cracking.
Adjusting. We'll call it
Yeah,
adjusting.
exactly. I was using a technique like that. And so I guess we'll start with my story. So, practicing with my now ex-husband, we opened an office in Newburyport or in Salisbury, right outside of Newburyport, Mass in 2005. And then we were going along, started having kids. In 2010, I had what was my first spiritual awakening, which showed up in the forms of severe anxiety and panic attacks, where I was in the gym one morning and I was in a spin class and my whole body went numb and I couldn't feel anything.
Oh, that must
And
have been scary.
it was so scary. And now, mind you, it was really hot in there. So I was just like, oh, it's really hot. But
Right.
like I couldn't function. So someone had to help me off the bike out of the room. They ended up calling an ambulance because I was just very
Right.
disoriented. Long story short, I went to the ER. They ran all kinds of tests, totally normal, nothing going on. Left the hospital, went back to get my car and got on the highway and then had what now I understand to be a panic attack, another panic attack. So what was actually happening was had a panic attack. And so that was really the start of my spiritual awakening, which really at the root of it was recovering memories of childhood trauma that I had repressed for almost 30 years.
Wow.
So yeah, so it was very, very intense. I at that time in 2010, my daughter, let's see, my son was about 6 to 9 months old. My daughter was just under 3. So my kids were super young. I was running a business. And I had to stop I had to stop. I stopped working. I was like, I don't know what's happening. So divine intervention, I met this medical doctor that was also a psychic and did energy work. And he started doing this energy technique on me. And at about 2 months in is actually when I realized I started recovering the memories of the trauma. So I was
Mm,
like, I was able to put it all together of, okay, this is what's happening, which made a lot of sense.
right.
Because I'm like, I know this isn't happening for nothing. Like I know
Right.
I'm just, like I know my body's not working against me, because just the mindset of being a chiropractor and everything I had this, I'm like, I know something's happening. And then I started to connect all the dots. And then it was like, oh, so many things started to make sense. So that set me on a whole new trajectory of like, okay, the things that we experience in our lives, no matter what. And you were saying, like, when we're infants, even before that, when we're in the womb,
Oh, yeah.
we're absorbing. And then the childbirth can also be very traumatic.
Right.
So I started doing this whole, first and foremost for myself, looking at what had I experienced in my life and what was coming up for healing, and then how do I heal it?
Wow.
Yeah.
And how did that get you to where you are today doing the work that you're doing?
Yes. So in 2012, I actually left chiropractic. I stopped practicing chiropractic because, again, at that time I was doing traditional chiropractic, and I was like, "This is not." I just could feel that the way I was practicing was actually not able to help people in the way I wanted to help them, because I would see people come in and it would be like I would do the same things over and over again, and then they would get some relief, but then it was like it didn't feel like anything was really getting solved. And I was like, I can't do this in integrity and still practice this way. It just doesn't feel right. So I went off, started learning all the, again, just very deeply dove into trauma. How does it work in the nervous system? How does it live in the nervous system? What happens? All of these different things, the fight or flight response. And then learned Akashic records, and like I've learned all these different things along the journey. And then let's say fast forward to end of 2019. When you have someone who tells you about something and you have three different people that like say the same thing,
You're like, maybe
and
I should start listening.
yeah, you're like, huh. And so I had that happen with network chiropractic. And it was like, someone was like, oh, you should do network chiropractic. You should. And I was like, okay, what is this network chiropractic? So I found a network chiropractor. I started going there and I was like, mind blown. And I'm like, okay, this is the technique where I can bring all of myself, because it doesn't just work on the physical level, it works mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to shift the whole nervous system. And so I started receiving the care in 2019, and then started getting trained in how to do it January of 2020. And then the world shut down.
Tell me what you mean. I don't remember
And then,
that. What happened?
I know, right? And then I went through a divorce. And then so some quote unquote detours, although they're never really
Sure.
detours along the way. So then really came back to this, really studying this technique and I opened my own office in August of 2023. So I've been doing this technique in my own office for a little over a year. And so that's kind of the journey. That's the short version, the
Right.
nutshell version.
And explain to the listeners and even to myself, I know we talked about it a little bit, but what
Yeah.
exactly happens in a session, right? Because when we think of chiropractic, and I mean, I have seen different chiropractors over the years, and they do have different methods in the way they do it, but
Yes.
it is all about adjusting, right? There is movement in the physical body that happens. I don't know that I've ever had somebody not physically move something in my body, right? So
Yes.
you're not doing that. So
I'm not
explain,
doing that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's such a different philosophy and perspective. So in the traditional chiropractic, you're finding the area of tension and then you're putting a force into that area, right? And that's what, when you're saying like, oh, I'm tensing up, right? Because it's like when you have tension in an area and you go to try to put force into it, that can actually make it more tense.
Right.
And although it may alleviate some symptoms temporarily, and you're essentially reinforcing that fight or flight response in the body, though.
Mm.
So what I do is I use the feet as a way of analysis, because there's attachments up in the neck and down in the pelvis that then wrap around and go into the ankle. So I can see what's happening in the spine through the feet. So I do my analysis. I come up with, okay, what's the pattern of tension we're working with? And then from that, I go to very, very specific areas, either in the neck or down in the sacrum, and I make a contact. Now, the contact I'm making, I'm going to just show you. I know if you're listening, you can't see this, but it's just a contact just like this. And then
It's a
I'll
light
hold.
touch,
It's
really,
a
is what
light
it is. It's
touch.
a
You're
light
right.
touch.
I'm using my hands. I'm
Yeah.
not using an instrument.
Yeah.
I'm using my hands. It's a light touch but in a very specific location.
Yeah.
And that helps to start a process where, first of all, the body's innate intelligence, that's what we call it in chiropractic, your body's natural healing ability. Every single person has this. Everybody has this innate intelligence. When I make that contact, I'm activating that intelligence. I'm
Mm.
bringing that intelligence online, helping to shift the nervous system out of that fight or flight into a state where we call it the parasympathetic nervous system, where this is where you're able to heal. This is where you're able to grow and evolve and have a sense of relaxation and peace. So
Mm.
I'm helping to shift the body from that, any version of that fight or flight,
Right.
into that different state, which is a parasympathetic. And then the energy, the innate intelligence of the body, then that energy goes and does the healing. It makes the adjustments. It reorganizes your nervous system. I'm not doing it. Your body's doing
Body's
it.
down. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. And I mean, as somebody who has been struggling with some body issues lately, right? I had my hip replaced last year. I had my knee replaced 8 weeks ago. And, I've had conversations with people. Like, I know there's an energetic component, but I also know that I was bone on bone, right? So there's a
Yeah.
physical and an energetic piece, right? So
Yeah.
now I fixed the physical, but
Yes.
that energetic piece is still there.
Yeah.
Now, I do a lot of work, right? And I'm still like I have a sense of what's going on, but that's my brain figuring it out. But what you're
Right.
saying is I don't even need to try to figure it out. My body is just going to know how to heal itself.
Totally.
Right.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this technique, is that it goes beyond what our mind is able to perceive and comprehend. And it uses the innate intelligence of your body. And that's what's doing the healing.
So, what would you say to people who are like, that's bullshit, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I would say that's okay, because
Okay.
I'm not here to try to convince anyone
Right.
to believe what I believe. I'm not here to try to prove myself in any way. If someone is not open to hearing or to being exposed to this technique, I'm not,
You're not
I'm
the
not
right,
gonna,
you're not the
yeah,
right fit.
that I'm not the right fit.
If somebody, people have disc issues, right? I have, my blah, 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 and my blah, blah, blah is not working. That's the
Yeah.
problem.
Yep.
Will this technique still work on them if if they think it's the physical thing that's really the issue?
Well, so here's the thing, and this is like, this I think is critical, because we have, I think for many different reasons, we have this perception that yes, we're physical beings, and that when we have a physical issue, it's always from a physical issue. All right, but we are energetic beings as well. We have energy. Everything is energy. So when you have a disc issue, there's actually a study that said 40% of the population has a quote unquote herniated disc with no symptoms whatsoever. So, okay, so if that's the issue, if it's the physical, then why wouldn't every single person that had a herniated disc have symptoms?
Mm.
All right. So it's like we think that it's the physical issue because we're like, oh, it's, we're in a body and this is what the body, and we're bone on bone and we're this and we're that. But what's allowed those symptoms to come forward is whatever energetic dis-ease that part of your body has been holding,
Holding on to.
sometimes for decades.
Yeah. Let's go back to like the panic attack, right? So you're having these
Yes.
panic attacks. Um, how did you then relate that to the trauma? Like how, I mean, you share as much or as little as you want, but how did you then,
Yeah.
because when you were saying that, I was like, huh, I can remember being twice. Like I just had a memory. I was probably
Yeah.
late teens, early 20s, and I was driving. So I know I was at least 17. I was probably like late teens, early 20s. And well, we didn't have cell phones, so I don't really remember but I remember like how, in hindsight, it was probably a panic attack. Like I was having trouble breathing and having to call my mother. It must have been a payphone because I'm a little bit older than, right?
Yeah.
But as you were saying that, I was like, oh, that was my body giving me some information. And I remember it happening on two occasions. But by the
Yes.
time she came and got me, I was fine. Right. And I didn't
Yes.
have my spiritual awakening until I was probably in my 40s. Right. So it was many
Right.
years later. But how did you put that? How were you able to put that together that, hey, this is some unhealed trauma that I need to look at?
Yes. And that's a great question. The reason I was able to put it together is because when I was working with that holistic medical doctor in 2010, he started training me on a technique that was helping get the body out of fight or flight. And then you would use muscle testing with a specific protocol to determine, okay, what was it that triggered the fight or flight? So what would happen is I would wake up. I just remember this literally hours after he taught me the technique. So it was like we were on a phone call, and being a chiropractor, it was really easy for me to learn
Sure.
the technique because he was like, oh, you do this point, and I already knew all the points on the body. So hours after we had that phone call that night, I wake up at about 3 in the morning, can't breathe, 10 out of 10 panic attack. I'm like completely distraught. And it was like literally from 0 to 10.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, there was some part of me that was like, okay, I know this is not a coincidence. I literally just learned this technique.
Right.
And so I started using this technique as I was like, okay, what's happening right now? So I did all the points to start to shift me out of that fight or flight. And then I started using muscle testing to determine what was it that triggered it. And
Hmm.
what ended up coming up was, so just to be completely transparent, I had experienced sexual abuse in my
Okay.
childhood.
Yeah.
And so what was actually happening was a body memory. I wasn't having a visual memory of it, but my body was remembering because there were times it happened at night.
And did you know, like, did your memory know that you had been sexually abused, or was it coming through these panic attacks? Like, had you had a conscious memory of it prior to that?
It, I I had repressed it
Okay.
until I started getting the panic attacks.
Okay.
And after doing the energy work with that medical doctor for
Yeah.
about 2 months, it started to trickle in.
Yeah.
And after I became aware of it, I told him about it. And then he said, I need to train you in this technique so that you can help yourself.
Okay.
And so it was like all of that happened. And that was like literally in a very short period of
Yeah.
time. And then I started using it and I was like, oh, okay, here we go. I'm literally, I'm putting it to use right off the bat here. And so as I used the muscle testing and I was like, okay, what is happening? A very specific memory came and I identified that memory. And then as soon as you identify it, there was a way to release it all. And as soon as I hit that release, every sense of panic went away. It like instantly.
Wow.
And so I was like, oh,
This is cool. I need to.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's how I knew that they were linked because and then every time that would happen, and it didn't even have to be a panic attack necessarily. It could just be, a lot of anxiety or a lot of
Yeah.
sensation somewhere. And I'm like, oh, I'm triggered. My nervous system is triggered. And then I would use the technique and then I would release, and then I would go back to as if nothing happened at all.
So, do your clients come to you because they have more of the physical issues, or are they coming to you because they're having anxiety, emotional issues, things like spiritual issues?
Um, I would say for the most part, it just is like people find me that have both.
Okay.
So
So they have some sense of awareness of the spirituality and the emotional stuff and know that there's a link, and they're like, yeah, I want to work with you because of that link.
exactly,
Okay.
because most people had already tried many different things,
Yeah.
talk therapy, regular chiropractic, all different kinds of things. And they were just like, I'm not getting the results. And so when they find out, about how I work and how it's different, they're like, okay, this is where I can actually maybe get some relief.
Right.
Yeah.
How would you how what suggestions would you have for listeners and how they can start seeing anxiety or other health issues as a message to listen to their body?
Yeah. And this is honestly, this is so important because we have been just inundated in society and with the medical field. Anxiety is bad. You need to take a medication. You need to numb it. You need to do whatever you can because it's bad. It's wrong. Your body's broken.
Yeah.
That is so far from the truth. And that actually is hurting and damaging many people. And the truth is that anxiety is a message. Your body is trying to tell you something. Your body is saying, there's something going on here. Either, it doesn't always mean that, like in my case, that there was some really significant trauma there, but it's a message to get your
Right.
attention to say, hey, sometimes it's about the job, or you've been in a job and it's sucking the life out of you, and you go every day and you have this severe anxiety, and your body's saying, stop. Why are you living this way?
That's so, I want to share two things. One, I had the same exact conversation with a client recently because she was trying to stop the anxiety. And I was like, what if you just don't and just see what happens, right? Like, see what's in
Yes.
there, because she was so afraid that, or most people are so afraid that they're going to have the panic attack when, in fact, maybe just sit in the discomfort of the anxiety for a little while and see what happens. And on our next call, she was like, I took your advice and I just sat with it and nothing
Yeah.
bad happened, right? Like, it was information. It was
Yes.
just messaging. But I had an example of that for myself personally. I've been a coach for, I don't know, 11 or 12 years, but really just doing it part-time until 2020. And in 2019, I was laid off from a corporate job.
Mm.
And then this little thing called COVID happened. And I was still in April, somebody reached out and was like, hey, you coaching? And I was like, sure, cuz what the fuck else am I doing besides painting my house, right? So that's when I went full time, but I still was applying for jobs because I was still collecting unemployment. So I was trying to like build this business. And what I
Mm.
realized was every time I had an interview, I was having this anxiety. Right. I was like, all right, I need to pay attention to this message, this information. So finally I
Yes.
said to my husband, I'm like, my body is saying, bitch, we don't want this. Please
Absolutely.
stop trying because we don't want this.
Totally.
Yeah. And I had a
Totally.
client a few years ago that had a similar experience. She said she was out of work and she had some part-time jobs, but she was looking for something more permanent. And she went into an interview and she was like, I felt so anxious. And then I felt anxious after. And I was like, so what is that? And she's like, I don't think this is the right thing for me. And I was like, I don't think it is either. Right. But it is, and
Yeah.
it's not like the panic attacks that there's something, something sexual abuse underneath it, right? Which
Right.
I think
Right.
that's the fear, is that, oh my God, what's here? Right? What am I hiding? But it really was
Yeah.
just information. I was like, I wasn't feeling anxious yesterday when I didn't have an interview, but this morning I'm feeling anxious because I really don't want to fucking do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is that sometimes the anxiety is there because you're actually on the right track too. So it doesn't always have to
Yes.
be that
Right.
you're on the wrong track. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, what if this does work out?
Right.
What if I do get all of the things that I've been dreaming of?
Right.
Am I really worthy of those things? So it can actually, it can work in different ways,
Do
Yeah,
you work on that self-worth piece? Like, is that part of the work that you do? Does that, I do a lot of that, but it's more, I do energy healing along with coaching,
yeah.
but is the work that you're doing helping clear and heal that feeling of not worthy?
100%, because that's been one of the biggest healings in my life. And I had a massive experience of that in May of 2022. So anyone who comes to me is going to naturally just be, is going to come because on some subconscious level,
Sure.
they know that the healing that I've done in that I'm able to hold the space for them to heal that piece as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I was talking to my own therapist yesterday, who I said to her, I go, I feel like every one of my clients has been a mirror of the shit I'm going through lately, right? Like I'm
Totally.
just a few steps ahead. And she's like, right?
Yep.
Because I am for her. Like I know her outside of the work that we're doing, right? And she's like,
Uh-huh.
yep. But I was like,
Yep.
damn. Because we do energetically, we're at we're resident there, our resonance is what they're attracted to, right?
Absolutely. And here's another really big piece that I think is really important. When we're going to healthcare providers, are they doing their own work?
Right. Right.
Because if they're not, I personally, I don't want to be a patient of someone who's not doing their own work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and because there's going to be a significant limitation and how they're able to see things and how they're able to, the resources they're able to provide. So that's one thing that I'm committed to in my journey. It's one of my highest values, is to consistently be doing my own inner work and my own healing. And I'm very transparent. I mean, not transparent to the point where it's like inappropriate or over
Right.
the line with boundaries. Like I don't have people come in and I like tell them all my stuff and make it about
Right.
me. But when the time, when it's appropriate, I can share very deeply personal things that I've gone through, and people are like, wow, okay, you're not just here some healer, you actually
Right.
are walking the walk and you get it,
And I
and you
think
walk
that's
through it.
important because I'm like you. I have a storyteller archetype. So I I
Mhm.
I coach, I teach through my stories. And I think that's what makes me relatable. Like I can be messy too,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
and I remember when I was going through, because a lot of my work is moving me from my head into my body and into my heart, right? Because I was a
yes.
very heady person. I still am, but I'm much more aware of being like, all right, what does this feel like? But I can remember being in healing school and coaching school, and they were talking up here, but they weren't talking to a place where somebody who was so heady could understand what an emotion was. They would, you know what I mean? Like, so I
Yeah,
really give examples and then they go, oh,
yes,
okay, right?
yes,
I had a client recently who was justifying why, well, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. And I was like, hey, there's big T trauma and little T trauma.
yes.
And even though you don't have the big T trauma, you have, and she was like, oh. Okay,
Oh
thank
yeah,
you. Like that actually allowed her to go, you know what? Maybe this wasn't so great, right? Or maybe whatever, but like being
yes.
able to just have that because when we're so up in our heads, we're trying to figure shit out without having the the background or other information. So I'm
Mm.
bringing that other information that I've had to figure out on my own because nobody was like, hey, let me explain this at the level you can understand it because this is how you process.
Yeah. And something's also very important that Dr. Gabor Mate goes over is he says with trauma, it's not what happens to you that's the trauma. That's traumatic. Those things are
Yeah.
traumatic, what's happened. But the trauma is actually what happens inside of you as a response of what happens to you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter at the end of the day, as far as your nervous system is concerned, your nervous system doesn't care if your trauma wasn't as bad as someone else's. If it's left you with this perception or this story that you're not worthy, that you're not lovable, that you're not enough, then you're only going to create more of that in your life. And so it doesn't matter.
Right. And we don't often know, it's interesting. I pull cards at the end of every call, every conversation. And today I pulled the inner child deck,
Oh,
which
I love
so
it.
I was like, oh
I
my
love
God,
it.
this is blowing my mind right now. Because
Yes. Yeah.
that, right? Like I remember years ago working with a healer, and I don't even remember what the conversation was, but I remember thinking this benign experience that I would have called a benign experience. I was like, whoa, that was in my nervous system, right?
Yes.
And even I share openly with my clients and with people when I was 15, my in one weekend, my grandmother tried to commit suicide and my parents told us they were getting divorced.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
I will tell you as an adult, my parents had an amazing divorce. Like, so grateful. We all had holidays together, my dad and his girlfriend, my mom and her
Mhm.
fiance, right? Like, it was great.
Okay.
When I started doing inner child work, right? I see my little girl she was like 3 or 4 and we played and it was great. And then when I saw
Mhm.
my 15-year-old, she was like, back the fuck up, bitch. And I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
what's going
Yeah.
on here?
Yes.
And I call myself a control freak in recovery. And what I realized was at that moment, she made sure she was never unprepared again. Nobody ever checked in on that 15-year-old. Like my grandmother was fine. My parents had a great divorce, but what was left was nobody being, and what I found out like in the last 20 years, my grandmother lived in an in-law apartment in a house, and my sisters didn't even know my grandmother tried to commit suicide. We all lived in the same house,
Oh my
right? They were
God.
like, whose grandmother tried to commit suicide? And I was like, ours. How do you not know this?
Oh my
Right?
gosh.
So like
Wow.
my experience versus theirs, right,
Yeah.
was different. One sister thought my parents' divorce was her fault, right? I'm like, what did you think you would do? You did. You were 13. Right? So we
Yeah.
all hold that in.
But that's perfect example of
Yes.
what I was just talking about. As is it's what Gabriel Monte says is that it's not about what happens to you, it's about what happens inside of
Yeah.
you. We
Yeah.
all have these different things that we want to make sense of things. And I did the same thing. My dad passed away unexpectedly when I was 3.
Ooh,
And for the longest time, for decades of my life, I thought somehow it was my fault,
right.
right? Because you got to make sense. Got to
And
this
as an
smart.
adult, you're like, what were you, how? What did you, right? You can rationalize and be like, well, that's just silly.
I
But that
know.
3-year-old,
Right.
yeah,
And the more you try to rationalize it, the more you actually prevent your healing.
yeah,
Because if you don't honor that, if I didn't honor that 3-year-old and really just say, the inner child stuff of just like, oh my gosh, and really be with her and be present with her and hold her and love her,
right.
I would have never been able to move forward because that's what lives in your nervous system,
Yeah,
not what the logical adult brain is telling you. It's what
right.
those unhealed parts are saying.
Yeah, because I mean, I would brag to people about what an amazing divorce my parents had. And when I started doing inner child work and hit that 15-year-old, I was like, whoa, what's happening? But then
Yes.
I was like, oh, of course, this is where the control freak kicked in because nobody ever checked in on
Yes.
this 15-year-old and she was never going to be unprepared again, right? She was unprepared for that
Totally.
weekend. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then so it's like in your nervous system. So if we tie it back, this is exactly how I work with people. In your nervous system, something shifted that day of, okay, in order to prevent anything like this from happening again, I have to always be prepared. I have
Right.
to be hyper vigilant. I have to
Yep.
be always on the go, always making sure that I'm 10 steps ahead of everyone else.
Yeah. Welcome to my world.
Right. And that has consequences because
Yeah.
when we're in that state of fight or flight, we're in that hypervigilance. It's okay if we're there for a period of time, right? And then we regulate back and we go back into balance. But if we're living there for months, years,
Oh, yeah.
decades, the consequence of that in the body, because what we're not able to process and feel, our body holds. And then this is where we get into health issues, because if our body's having to hold these things for us, over years and decades, that's where it really starts to turn into health issues.
Yeah. I love the Louise Hay book, You Can Heal Your Life.
Yes.
I remember when I first got
So
the
good.
book, I went through like every ailment I had and attached it to the emotional. I was like, damn, right? Like it
So
was
good.
so on point. And I was like, all right, we got some work to do here. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not about ignoring the physical and not and making
Right.
that. It's about looking at it really honoring ourselves as not just a physical being, but an energetic being as well. And if we don't honor those, then we're going to miss a big part of our healing.
Yeah, I love that. How would you invite people, because it's always an invitation, right? To
Yes.
start
Yes.
seeing, to start paying attention to anxiety or other health issues and listen to their body. Like, what are some things that you would suggest for people to start taking this as information?
Yeah, and I think the first thing is just the perspective shift. Shifting it from, oh, when I feel this pain or when I feel this sensation, this is somehow my body's failed me, my body's going against me. Oh, I'm just getting old. I hear that one. So I'm like, or like there's so many excuses that we that we use. And
Right,
it's so the first thing is the perspective shift of instead of just thinking our body as this thing that just is gonna, go against us as like, no, our body is a, it wants to work with us. It's wants to be a team with us. And so if we start shifting that perspective, then we can start looking at it like, okay, what's really happening here? Yes, I'm having this discomfort. Let's just say, let's just say sometimes with athletes where they've been running for decades of their life and their body is just like, you know what? This isn't working for me anymore. But their identity is so wrapped up in being a runner. And this is what they think that they have to do in order to, be fit and all of these things. And it's like, then the body starts to break down. And so if we have, and I'm just saying in this scenario, this make-believe scenario, which can also be real, we
right,
have the knees fall, the knees are given out, the hips, the, chronic IT band stuff. There's all kinds of things that runners can receive that, experience over time when the body may just be saying, stop,
right, right.
stop this. Let's find another way. There's other ways there's other ways to be healthy and work out that are just going to be more nourishing for the body. But again, maybe a blow to the ego.
Yeah, right. Because that's your identity, right?
Exactly. So if
Yeah.
we just start to look at it from a perspective of, okay, first of all, what am I experiencing? What have I been feeling? And if I see this as a message, what would the message be from my body? Now you can do some journaling. Some people they love journaling and they can just write it out as if your body could write you a letter, what would it say? And then you're just using your hand is just the message from the body. So you can journal
Yeah.
all that out.
I would even add use your non-dominant hand. Have you ever done
You
that?
can do that
Journal
too.
with your non-dominant hand because it gets you out of your brain. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I have done that as well.
Yeah.
So journaling is one way, just meditate, but not everyone resonates with that. So you could do some meditation on it where you just quiet your mind and you just pose this question of, all right, I've been having this one issue here, and let me just tune into this area of my body. If it was giving me a message, what would it say? And then maybe you
Mm.
sit in silence for a half hour or 10 minutes or 5 minutes.
And I would also invite paying attention to your language, right? So when I had my hip, when I was before I had my hip done, my language was I'm not safe in my body because my hip was giving out. So I'd be walking and all of a sudden it would give out.
Yes.
And the same with the
Yes.
knee, right? Like my root chakra is not supporting me. Like those were words I was using. And I was
Yes.
like, okay, this is information, right? This is
Yes.
this is big information, right? Like my core foundation is not supporting me, right? So paying attention to what you're saying about the issue. And yeah,
Yes. Yes. And I will say that one of the biggest things is around safety. In some form, in some way, shape, or form, every person that walks in my body,
In
every
your
person that
body.
walks in my body, every person that walks into my office, they don't feel safe in their body. Now,
Mm,
that's not consciously what some
right.
people would say. Some people would say that, but some people would not be able to kind of connect those dots. But again, when there's traumas, when there's unhealed emotions, when there's things that have been living in us, we just unconsciously disconnect. And
Mm,
it's like, oh, this is not safe. This is not safe. And so that's a big part of when I'm working with someone is being able to bring that element of safety back into their body.
yeah. Oh, we could go on and on. This
I
has
know.
been so
Yeah.
good. Oh my God, there's so much good in here. So I always love to ask this question at the end to everyone. What is
Yeah.
something that you live by that you want to share with our listeners?
You got to feel it to heal it.
Ooh, love
I
that.
will say, right? It's cliche, right? You know, I've I've gone from places where I've had nothing. I've had no home, no money, no career, nothing. And but in the deepest places of depression, anxiety, PTSD, the way that I've been able to get from the lowest points in my life to where I am today is by feeling the things that I had been running from. The majority of the people, when there's a health issue, have been running from feeling.
Mm,
They've been running from feeling the heartbreak, the grief, the shame, the
yeah.
things. And so when you find the courage and the bravery, which by the way, you have, when you find that courage and you say, you know what? I'm not going to live my life this way anymore. And you just tune in and you just start feeling the things that you've been running from, breathing with it, breathing with it. You feel that sensation. You're like, oh my God, I got to run. I got to go eat something, or I got to go on Facebook, or I got to go
Busyness. Like I work with
busy.
the addiction of busyness. Like that's my
Yes.
clients, right? Like they don't want to, and this is me and my older version of me where I got to stay busy. I got to stay busy. I got to stay busy so I don't have to feel the
Yeah,
things. And
exactly.
I also used to weigh 300 pounds. So it was eating and being busy. So I was a busy 300
Wow.
pound woman,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when we're able to feel the things we've been running from, there is no faster way to change your life and change your health than to feel.
Yeah.
And what that means, if you can literally, if you're listening right, you can start in this moment right now by breathing with the energy. When you notice something that's uncomfortable and it's, you start to catch yourself to go to that numbing strategy and you just say, I'm going to breathe with this energy because essentially it's energy. If we can say it's energy and you just start breathing with it, it wants to be seen and acknowledged. And often when we do that, it leaves us.
And I think there's so much fear of what is on the other side of it. And if we allow ourselves to go through it and then we're like, oh, this wasn't so bad, right? But we stop
Yes.
because there's so much fear of the what's on the other side of this that we don't actually have the opportunity to be like,
Yes.
oh, I'm actually okay on the other side of this.
Exactly. It's the
Yeah.
unknown. It's that unknown. It's that I'm not safe.
Right.
And every time I've gone into that place and my patients have gone into that place, they come out the other side more free, more liberated, happier, more joyful because not only
Right.
that, but they've built that trust in themselves. I was able to walk through that fire and I'm okay.
I love that. Oh, on that note, that's
Yes.
where we're ending. This has been
All
awesome.
right.
So I pick three cards before we
Yes.
start, and I don't look at them, which is always fun because it's always somehow intertwined with the conversation. So we
Yeah.
have left, center,
Okay.
and right. I'm going to let
Ooh,
you
I'm
pick
gonna go
first.
center. Center.
Center. I knew that's what you're going to pick. Mm. Spend time in nature. Let the beauty of nature refresh your soul. Love
Ooh.
that.
All right.
For those of
I
you
love
listening,
it.
if you picked center, so if you picked left, review your responsibilities. Not all responsibilities are ours to hold. And how often
Oh,
I mean, we already talked about this, right? Like you thought your dad dying was your fault, and right?
yes.
And if you picked
Yes.
right, today is the day. It is time to begin the journey
Ooh,
of self-healing, right? I love that. That is
powerful cards.
really is. That is very, there's a giraffe in that. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little giraffe,
Oh,
and
I
I don't
can
know,
see
that looks like
that.
a butterfly on top of the
Oh
giraffe,
my
but it's very
gosh.
large.
Yeah.
Oh
Ooh,
my gosh.
powerful.
Colleen, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. I so appreciate this. For those of you listening, thank you for being here today and taking this journey with me towards a more enlightened and fulfilling life. I hope that today's episode has inspired you to embrace your inner wisdom and navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. Remember, transformation begins from within. Take a moment each day to connect with your higher self and trust the universe is guiding you toward your highest good. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with anyone else who might benefit from our message. Your support really helps us to reach more souls on their spiritual journey. Stay connected with our community. All the social media links, all of Colleen's information will be in the show notes. You can visit my website at foreverchangecoaching.com for any additional resources. And until next time, continue to shine your light and walk in peace. I am Francine Terrell, and this has been Effin' Fridays with Francine. Colleen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much.